Here we are. That was kind of here.
I'm excited about today's episode, man. Like, one of my colleagues is joining, Dennis Holmes. He is so freaking smart and knows all the things. He's been on both sides of the pond, man. He, obviously he works at Facebook now here in the States, but he's worked in Europe, in London, and he's like licensed to practice law in both. I don't know where in the U.S. he's licensed, but I think New York, but I'm not positive. And he's also like a licensed barrister or whatever it is over in the EU, which is super cool.
He's a Renaissance man.
Renaissance privacy man.
Picked,
he knows a lot of stuff, man.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because of that Renaissance capability that he's got.
Yeah, I love the Ninja Turtles too, by the way. Like, one of my favorite TV show cartoons when I was a kid, for sure. And one of the few things that translated into my parents buying me toys. So whoever.
What'd you think of the movie? What'd you think of the movie?
The first movie I thought was solid. It's probably the first movie I watched back to back and knew all the lines and would say them out loud. The second movie, I don't know, but like the first movie was A+. But also, I'm like a kid and obsessed with Ninja Turtles, so like I feel like my parents probably suffered through that movie quite a bit.
For me, it's a movie we did also in season 3, an episode on Back to the Future, which is I don't know when that one will be out, but with Killian and Back to the Future, I could quote it back to front.
Yeah, I think I actually can do the same for Back to the Future. It's also one of my all-time favorite movies. But I remember very clearly, like, sitting in my living room. I had the Ninja Turtles movie on VHS, and just like watching it over and over and over again, and just being super into it. I had the toys, the whole deal, and I also liked like the ethos of the Ninja Turtles, right? Like, just, I don't know, man. It's like a good, clean cartoon, and at least as I remember it, and super adventurous, but like strong female character, like all kinds of interesting things happening in there. Maybe a little bit goofy and quirky, but I loved it. And I also love that they had a van in the video game. Oh, the Ninja Turtles video game. Oh my God, I love that thing on Nintendo, man. That thing was A+.
Who's the Splinter of privacy?
The Splinter of privacy. Man, are we going all the way back to like Brandeis and those folks? Or are we...
Dennis is, Dennis brought up Brandeis, and that's one of that paper or whatever is one of the seminal documents in privacy. So maybe one of those justices is the Splinter. Maybe it's like Jules or Trevor, one of these people that are currently kind of leading thought leaders and training privacy people. So maybe it's an IAPP kind of thing that is the, Splinter's the sensei.
I could see that. I like the Jules analogy quite a bit, Trevor too. But like, I don't know, Andy, because like privacy, I think there's a lot of diversity of opinion, right? Yeah. So I think there's a lot of splinters, right? In different parts of the privacy discussion, because we don't all agree. Like, as much as I love Jules and Trevor, and I look to them as leaders on a lot of things, we don't agree on everything.
I like your point. Because it's not just one person, and it's not going to
bunch of little dojos,
Privacy doesn't slow down, and we've talked a lot about where privacy work is done more effectively in a law firm versus in a company environment. And I think you're going to have diversity of thought across all of those vectors. So there's going to be really good privacy work being done in both places by lots of people, and less good in both places too.
Is it like, who's the shredder of privacy? Is it social media? Is it like Facebook, TikTok, and Google? Are they like shredders? Are we the three? Who knows, right? I'm not sure. But I don't know that there's any villains, right? But I definitely think there's a lot of diversity of opinion, and I think that's good. One thing about, like when I think of like organizations like EFF versus like an FPF, there's clearly like a more activist component to an EFF than there is with an FPF. And so, like, I just think there's room for all of it. And
there's ways to be activists that you and I have discussed that make a lot of sense in this world. Like you may not agree with Max Schrems, and you may not. Somebody
he's the Casey Jones of
somebody might not think that his approach is the right approach, but like he has a right to take his approach and do the things that he's doing, and I don't think he goes about it in a way in a way.
I mean, he's definitely disruptive about it.
Very like disruptive, yeah. But there's other advocates that go about it in a way that is really unsavory, and I think there's room for doing advocacy in a way
without being a
isn't
jerk.
Savory, right? It isn't
without being a jerk. And definitely, having met Max Schrems, he's not a jerk. And I know exactly what you mean. Like, you don't have to be boneheaded just because you have a strong point of view and treat people like they're stupid. And I definitely don't think Max does that. But there's some people in our world that do.
Yeah, and they say a lot of hyperbolic things, and they say things, like they're a decree, about everybody's behavior. And the fact is, like, whether you're a smaller company or a large company, or you're visible or you're less visible, lots of people are trying hard to fix privacy problems and taking them seriously. And I think painting a broad brush across companies like that is really, it's not just unfair, it's dangerous.
Yeah,
I think it's really bad for our world.
I think you're right. Well, let's talk to Dennis and see, like, have him illuminate us on some of this stuff. And let's talk Ninja Turtles. I'm down.
Pizza too.
Pizza, yeah.
All right. Here we are.
We're here.
Here we are. We're here with Dennis Holmes, who works with you at Facebook. It's another Facebook episode. I'm excited about it, but he's not just a Facebooker. He's been in ad tech a long time, AppNexus, law firms, consulting, like a real privacy renaissance person.
Yeah, for real. He's an international player. Like, there's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, and you picked Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as the theme here, which is one of the best shows and movies ever.
You want to talk about, and sorry, I'll just say, like, you want to talk about monetization? Let's create the dopest cartoon ever to sell all these little plastic figurines. Like, what a score. But anyway, go, Dennis, go. I love the Ninja Turtles.
No, I think that, like, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are actually really interesting because they have, first of all, they have like Renaissance painter names, which is really weird. Like, I, as a child, I don't think I had any everybody was talking about Donatello and Michelangelo, and I had no idea about like these Italian painters. All I cared about was like pizza, the karate, and like them screaming dude. And it was like the coolest thing ever.
Speaking of pizza, I want to show you guys something. I found while I was poking around looking for backgrounds. I'm going to turn off my video for a sec. Check this out.
Oh, God.
Is that like an old Dare poster?
I don't know what this is, but this is the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Why do I not see it? What's wrong?
You don't see it?
I don't see anything. You're gone.
Right. Oh, no. But you don't see even his screen? That's weird.
You don't see my... Okay, so the world can see that it says, say no to drugs, say yes to pizza.
So not with anchovies, right? No anchovies.
Good recollection.
I don't know about you guys, but I hate anchovies, but I like Caesar salad. I'm glad we're getting really substantive here. I love a good Caesar salad, but I don't like anchovies.
So you just don't like it with like authentic dressing?
I mean, yeah, sort of. Yeah, I like the off-brand imitation Caesar dressing, I guess. There's something about anchovies to me, man. I don't know. I love tuna. I love sardines. Can't make it with the anchovies.
Have either of you ever had tableside Caesar salad, where they prepare it for you and they make the dressing right there?
I've never had tableside, but one of my old roommates, his dad was a executive chef, and he was like, oh, I know how to make real Caesar dressing. So like I've had like akin to tableside where you like grind the anchovies. Yeah. It wasn't a process I needed to view.
Yeah.
But it tasted great. Like I didn't need to see him making it. But it was delicious.
Such a good point. Okay, we're way off topic, but
wait, no, I got one. This is important because it's Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
So Michelangelo is my favorite Ninja Turtle, and he eats a ton of pizza. And I have to ask a pizza topping question because it's important for the rest of the discussion. Pineapples on the pizza, yes or no?
I don't mind pineapple on pizza. I definitely don't.
Andy, what's your thoughts?
I'm really into pizza. So let me just say that. Like at Alice, we have to pick our 5 to 9s, which is like what we do in life, and we put them on our email signatures. And so pizza is on there, tennis, pizza, and being a dad. Those are my 3 5 to 9s. So I'm really into pizza. And this question has come up a lot. We have a pizza Slack channel at Alice. So like there's conversation going on about this in different arenas of my life. But when it comes to pineapple on pizza, there's 2 categories, right? There's people that are okay with it and people that are haters. There's no middle. There's just like, absolutely not. You know, to me, if you like it and it tastes good, eat it. I don't see the problem with it. Who needs to hold like certain pizza toppings up into some upper echelon of pizza toppings? To me, pizza's
I'm a pineapple hater, man. I think I'm
Are
a
you?
purist. I don't like that shit. I'll tell you this: if you like pineapples on your pizza, you don't care about privacy. So you're both wrong.
Yeah,
That's a really interesting philosophy.
It's very rational. No, but there's some. My sister loves pineapples on pizza. I hate it, and this used to be like the argument when we would order pizza at the house. We always end up with 2 mediums because I can't do the pineapples, and she loves herself a Hawaiian pizza, man. And I'm just like, you disgusting. It's unpatriotic, man. I'm telling you.
well, I would never order it. Like, I don't go out of my way to order. We ordered pizza 2 nights ago here. We don't order pineapple pizza here.
Yeah.
But when it's presented to me as an option, I'll
down
dabble. I'll dabble.
I like that. I like that free spiritedness. I can support that. Dennis, I like your defense of pineapple pizza. I think we're all wrong and right at the same time.
What I was going to say just really quickly was, it's off topic and we're way off, but that's fine. One time I was in New York City and I did have something prepared tableside, which is the first time I'd ever had that before. And it was this Italian restaurant. So we're still in Italy, which is good, where they took this wheel of parm, like bigger than like my whole head, you know, this big. And they just cut it open and hollowed it out. And they just threw the pasta in there and like mixed it in the bowl of parm with hot cheese poured all over it. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And, like, so Dennis, to your point, that I needed to see tableside. But like Caesar salad, I agree. Didn't need that.
Yeah.
You sure this actually happened, or were you just drunk at the Olive Garden?
I was with my mom.
I didn't even know Olive Garden still existed.
There's one in like Times Square. No, that's the only one I know of, to be honest. But like, I don't think I haven't been to an Olive Garden.
I don't think you should go to any restaurant in Times Square.
Yeah, no, of course not. Of course not. I only know that because I saw like a Post Malone, I think it was like Jimmy Fallon episode or something where they were like eating at the Olive Garden. So
just say no to Times Square. Food in Times
Square. Yeah, say no to that. I'm with you. That I can get on board with.
It's like, so Dennis, you lived in New York, correct? You used to live there?
I did. I lived in New York for about 3 years.
So like New York to me as a frequent visitor is like, I feel every time I go there, any meal is a waste if it's not great, because there's so many great choices there. So Times Square is doubly bad for that.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that. And I think contrary to popular belief, great meals in New York do not have to be expensive.
Totally agree.
Like my whole mission in New York was like, this place is freaking expensive. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make it my business to get everything I can as cheap as possible. It was like a game to me. And I was able to find like an unlimited boozy brunch for $25 in the West Village with like the best food.
New York is a place where you can be extravagant about what you spend on food, but it's also the best $15 dinner place in America, in my opinion. I know the LA people will get mad at me. I know, like, whatever, but like, I think New York is the best place for cheap eats, man.
I'm gonna tie this to privacy. So
do it.
In that vein, Dennis, privacy, I believe, does not have to be something that costs millions of dollars to enable, and can be enabled with a lot of, I don't know, cheap's the wrong word, but like quick, easy wins. And
simple.
You guys agree with that? Yeah.
I agree. I agree that fancy tech and, you know, bells and whistles are not necessary for a good sort of privacy compliance program. That being said, if you have the resources, you should invest them in privacy. I don't think it's something that should be scrappy and like strung together on a budget because it's that important. But it doesn't have to be expensive as a rule.
Does it depend on your visibility? Like level, Facebook
Well,
has
that's
different
an
visibility.
existential question, right? Like, should you do more because you have a bigger impact and because you're more likely for like to be pinged or dinged for not doing the right thing, or should you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do?
But I agree with the premise, by the way, that like to run a solid privacy program, you don't have to have a multi-billion-dollar budget, right? If you begin with the premise that you're going to have like a privacy protective approach to your data, right? It's hard to unpack that once you've decided, or not decided, but once like you've built an open system and it's out there and now it's big and you're getting scrutiny and then you have to like build backward or unbuild. That's really expensive.
Well, yeah, I agree. But I mean, that's like with everything, right? Like if you build a house and you build it, sort of cheaply and crappily, like to fix it is more expensive. It would have been cheaper to just start out, doing the right thing, because you can scale, good practices. You can scale sort of privacy by design. Trying to, retrofit privacy into a complex organization is hard. Yes, also expensive and requires more resources.
I think that's right.
I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where we would really like to be, where we can build privacy programs truly from the outset. So like what happened when we all met, was years ago. Dennis, you were at AppNexus, Pedro, you were at Oracle, and I was at DataZoo. The GDPR happened to us. So while we were at those companies, privacy was there and relevant, and we were paying attention to, ad tech and the NAI and things that were required of companies that were processing information in the advertising ecosystem. But the GDPR obviously changed the game, put a lot of requirements on us, and we had to then adapt and look backwards at our systems that weren't built for that necessarily. Then we go to other companies and we do other things at other jobs, and you'd think that maybe, okay, like if you're joining a company at an early stage or something, you have the ability to build the privacy, infrastructure from scratch. And the truth is you still don't. Like I joined the earliest I've been at this company, and there was still a lot of retroactive work to be done on the system that's built, because I don't think people are yet, I say yet in a hopeful way, yet thinking about it early enough in the early stages of business development and companies that are processing a lot of data. I don't think they're quite there yet. I hope that we'll get there.
So actually, I thought I was going to disagree with the premise of what you were saying, but I do agree that when it comes to technology companies and building that, like, you're never going to be there like when the first line of code is written, right? But the point that I wanted to raise was that the GDPR did happen to us, but I think that things like the GDPR and other legislation will continue to happen. But I think that if you are always pushing the envelope, if you're always trying to be on the cutting edge of privacy, I do think that like the GDPR didn't happen to everybody. Like there were some people who had a few tweaks to do, and like they, I was in private practice at the time, so I was doing a lot of helping companies, pull things together to be prepared. And some of my clients needed a lot more help than others. Like some were like, great, we are pretty much doing, 85% of what's happening. The regulators taking a view on certain things that we took, it was like kind of a spit sign for some folks, not many, but for some. So I think that like, I think that there is potential for people to avoid having regulation be the impetus for pushing privacy practices forward in their organizations. But with respect to like the building of tech, like, yeah, you're never going to be there at the at the ground floor.
Yeah, and if we're being super honest about it, like, yeah, GDPR happened to us, but not really. Like particularly ad tech. I think the Europeans felt that some data practices had gone too far unchecked, right? And that's what brought on the regulation. I think a bunch of European regulators sat in a room and then said, let's find some interesting place to regulate them where there are no problems, right? Like I think they identified some opportunities for improvement, weren't seeing it happen at in the ways and at the pace that they thought was aligned with European citizens' rights. And so they passed this massive regulation to update the previous directive and clarify spaces where there was
I think
room.
there's a lot in, and I think there's a lot in what happened with the GDPR. I think that's definitely part of it. I think another part of it is that Europe was feeling, from a competition standpoint, feeling a lot of pressure from American tech companies, knowing that our data practices were different, and that was a way that they could sort of, stave off, a further, dominance by U.S. tech companies. There's a lot going on there, and a lot was specifically, targeted toward the digital advertising industry. So I thought that was like, pretty blatant.
Dennis,
if you had to name like sorry, Andy, real quick, like if you had to name like in your mind, like when I say what's the top European tech company, what comes to mind?
I've struggled about that.
I've struggled. I struggle. I know there's some really cool companies out there, but like I struggle.
Like social media companies, or do you just
tech? Just tech. Let's go with the broad category of tech, right?
So, so I would say something like Deliveroo, which is kind of like DoorDash, Uber Eats. Like when I was in London, I was all about the Deliveroo. That's the only one I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, and to your point about like the pressure from American tech companies, I think that's it. Like just like this, like Israel's got this great like tech innovation hub, and all these really cool startups get swallowed up that come out of Israel, right? Like there's some really cool stuff happening in Asia, right? Particularly China with like all of their apps ecosystem and all the stuff they built there. But like, yeah, I have trouble. I do know Deliveroo, and it is really cool, but like. I have trouble like conjuring images of European tech companies in my mind, and I think to Dennis's point, that might be part of the reason why the regulation is the way it is to sort of like level that playing field worldwide with like European expectations of data protection.
Criteo's another one. Criteo. If we're going to be
you're right. There's one right there.
Criteo was actually, sadly, one of the big ad tech players on the scene for a really long time.
You're right.
I don't know that that's still the case, but they were definitely for a while a huge player. And then I guess you've got, I think there are a fair amount of ad tech companies now that I've had some time to think. Like you've got,
I think there's some really cool like European regionals. Like every time I go to Spain, there's all these cool little apps that like do all this cool like not regional, but like all this cool local stuff. It's just hard for me to be like, what is that? Like when I think of China, obviously like some companies come to mind, right? Alibaba and Tencent, and but like when I think of Europe, just it's harder.
Here's a couple. SAP.
Yeah, but that's old school. That's like Siemens. Yeah, of course.
Tech company. SAP's tech company based in Germany.
Yeah. SAP's a great company, by the way. Shout out to SAP, who I used to deal with all the time, but.
There's some like, but you're right. Your point is really well made in the sense that there's no EU Oracle, there's no EU Google. It's not clear. Like to have to find SAP. Like if you went out on the street and you were like, if you went to Times Square, right near the Olive Garden, and you were like, have you heard of SAP? Like how many people do you think of are like? I've heard of SAP. They'd be like, you mean TreeSap? Like,
so I have a question though. So do we think that privacy plays into that? Because
that's where
according to, from a European point of view, or from an EU point of view, it's the wild, wild west for data in the US. And so we're able to, these companies, Google, whatever, where all these big tech companies are able to do so many innovative things because we're doing all these horrible things, quote unquote, with data. Whereas companies in Europe have to play by the rules, and maybe that stifles their innovation to some extent. Maybe that, hinders their ability to grow and sort of find an audience and really build the kind of companies that we've been able to build here. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting one, I think.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think there's something to the like privacy nexus with like, like the cultivating of tech companies in Europe, and I do agree with Dennis, like perception or not, I think there was this energy around like European companies are at a disadvantage because the rest of the world does whatever they want, and like the European companies have to follow these, the old directive, which wasn't exactly like loosey goosey either. And so when GDPR has this like long tail of application, globally, it sort of balances the playing field. But 3 years later from GDPR, like I still don't know I don't know that like all these tech companies emerged in Europe now because the playing field has been leveled a little bit. I don't know.
Another European tech company, Revolut, it's fintech. I would say this though, if we're going to talk about tech companies in Europe and the next to privacy, I feel like fintech is going to be the next frontier for like big tech companies. And I think it's definitely going to come out of Europe because they've got an open, or EU especially, because they've got an open banking system. When I was over there, do you know that if I went out to a restaurant with my friends and I paid and I needed my money back, they could just be like, give me your bank details and I'd have it in an hour.
That's right.
Like,
no, they are like every time I go to
hard
Europe,
fans.
There are leaps and bounds ahead of us on all fintech. It's not close. And I'll tell you where else, like telecom, like the telecom interoperability in Europe, every country has its own telecom companies and they all are interoperable and you can move seamlessly across the continent with good signal. And that is a like amazing tech achievement that even in the US where we only have 3 or 4 big telecoms, like it's nowhere near, I think, just like the level of interoperability. This is just strange. The intersection of privacy and all that is something someone should study who's much smarter than me. But my instincts tell me that there's some intersection there between like the non like app rapid development kind of Silicon Valley mentality, not really being obvious in Europe. I don't know. Dennis, you've worked on both sides of the pond. What do you learn from each side that you can apply in the other? In other words, like what did you learn when you were working on the, across the Atlantic that you now implement in your work here? And what do you take from here when you work there? Does it matter, or is this just a dumb question?
I don't think it's a dumb question. What I would say is that I think among some circles, at least in the US, privacy, at least at one point, was kind of a thing that people did, and it was like necessary and you could get really good at it, but it wasn't something that people took particularly serious. I think that has since changed. Sure. I think it's always been serious in Europe. It's a human right. And there's a lot of historical reasons why it is a human right and why people take it so seriously. And so I think that you're seeing a lot now in the US where consumers, I read somewhere where consumers are just, in the US are just outraged at all this stuff that's happening. I think that the US or sort of Western, post, outside of Europe, it's gotten more conscious about data and data practices and their own data. I don't think that consciousness is new in Europe. I think that people have always been very conscious of information and data, digital or not, that people are, that people have about them, and I think it's historical. I think it's cultural, and I think taking the view that this is not just about compliance or mitigating regulatory risk, but that this is at the end of the day about people. I think it's something that I took from my time in Europe, and I think something that in the US, it's very, we tend to, or at least my experience, we tend to look at the law and say, well, like, but what are we trying to achieve? It's not as much about, it's about being compliant, obviously, but, I think there's a lot of letter of the law versus, what do we think actually achieves the end that the law is seeking to.
Like the spirit of the law.
Yeah, it's very much that. And so I think it's a melding of, for me, how does this impact people and what are we trying to do to serve people? And like, how do we do that in a way that sort of achieves the end that the law is seeking to achieve for those individuals? Because I do think that sometimes the letter of the law has lots of unintended consequences.
I think that's why the GDPR is sometimes so polarizing for people here in the US, because we talked about this a lot. Like, the rights afforded people under the GDPR the actual question that Pedro raises a lot is that making people's privacy better? Do they have an actual, have they actually achieved a privacy benefit
Like,
from
yeah,
the fact
like
that
do
they can go
Europeans
like
are
request?
Europeans better off than everyone else in some way that I can measure when it comes to privacy after GDPR? I'm not saying they're not, but
I
it's
think
hard.
I think it depends on what you mean by better. I
Yeah.
think that it's a huge step in the right direction that you have a right to access your data, right? You have a right to delete it, right? So I think that there's something else that you find a lot in Europe is this property right perspective of privacy. Like my data is mine. I have a right to ownership of that, and so I should be able to control it in some way. And so telling people that we will show you everything we have on you. You can delete it, you can correct it, you can access it. Like the ability to manage the data that someone else holds about you, I think is huge, because I don't think that you could do much of that in the US prior to GDPR. You'd be really hard. I mean, the only thing I think of is like Axiom's data, corrector tool where you could go and they'd say, oh, we've got all the stuff about you and you could fix it. That existed prior to GDPR, but like it wasn't something that was very ubiquitous here.
You're right, absolutely. And in the sense that it also didn't exist in places that that people didn't find easy to access. So like if you knew to look at Axiom, maybe you would, but if you like post GDPR, post CCPA, I can go to Chipotle and say, delete all the data you have about me. And that might not have been a thought in my mind before then, or British Airways, or like whatever company, whether it's a hardcore tech company or whether it's just a service provider that uses a lot of technology. Pedro uses the example of Domino's Pizza quite a bit, because you don't ultimately think of them as a tech company. There's a lot of tech flowing through that platform. The ordering platform you mentioned, the three of us think of that as a tech company, but people probably think of that as a food delivery service, right? Enabled by a tech app. But the fact that you can go and you can make corrections and you can ask them about data, and that's well known, I agree that's important and it helps people, but I also don't know the answer to like, how does that actually make me feel better about things? Does it? Because it's my data is still everywhere. Like,
so I mean, that's an interesting question for me, because I spend a lot, and Pedro knows, I spend a lot of time thinking about, because to me, privacy is an existential thing, right? Like part of how I got into it is because I think it's super philosophical and it's super interesting to me. But the question is, when you go back to like Warren and Brandeis' article about the right to be left alone and the photograph and the camera and all that. But when you think about it, like what is privacy to me? What is it to you? What is it to Pedro? I think it's very personal, right? It's very personal. And so I think it's not helpful in this space to think of it about what is or isn't more private, and thinking about encryption and all of that. I think those are all very helpful tools. I think we'd be well served to think about what harms are we trying to avoid? What harms are we trying to mitigate against? Because I think that is something that is more scalable and more applicable, across, what my particular view of privacy is versus yours, right? And so I mean, I try to approach my privacy counseling in that way about, what harms are we trying to avoid, and how can we achieve that? Because if you try to find privacy, I think you're just going to go in circles.
Yeah, I think that's true. And also, I think not only do individuals think about what privacy means to them differently from each other, there's also regional notions of privacy, and they're different. Okay, like I'm from I was born in Europe by chance, but like I come from a Caribbean family background. Like our notions of privacy are very different than like a white Anglo-Saxon American notion of privacy. Like if you just think of the US, it's very like my door's closed. We live in sleep neighborhood, suburbs, like, sleep only in suburbs, and like, don't let your kids outside, and everything's about excluding others from like this like private little space. I think Europe is a lot similar, but like in a Cuban Caribbean family, like every door's open, everybody walks in and out, everybody has keys to everybody's house. Like, you know, friends, family just show up whenever unannounced and storm in and go into your refrigerator. And we like culturally, we're open in a different way with broader groups or different types of groups, depending on where we're from and who we are. So I worry sometimes about the fact that because the developed world, and when I say that, I really mean the West, I mean Europe and the United States, has this tremendous power to project its interests and its values and its customs, that we may be a little paternalistic in the way that like elite privacy thinkers from the West think that everyone else needs to operate and aren't asking enough questions in like places like India and China and South America and Africa. Which contain very different cultures inside of each, by the way, about like what's appropriate for privacy to you. What do you think about that, Dennis? Like, is a more regional approach appropriate? Should we define like a universal, like way of thinking about privacy? Like,
I've always been at this school that there's no one size, fits all when it comes to privacy. I think speaking practically, you've definitely got to have sort of a broader framework, but I definitely think there needs to be room to customize rather for specific regions, because I think it is problematic. And I think it also depends, right? I think it totally depends on like your company or what you're doing. And like, I think it depends on a lot of things, but I do think that we can't continue to apply this one size fits all. Or what often happens is, and I've seen this across all of my jobs, across all the things I've done, is we'll do X for Europe and then we'll do something else for everywhere else, because Europe, is king when it comes to privacy, and everywhere else it's not that important, or it's not as the risks are lower. And I think that is just a bad approach generally for a number of reasons. But I think it's, what does it mean when you decide that you're going to give a certain region of people more privacy versus another? And I think that plays back to your questions. Like, as we start to think, if you were to take the approach of varying your approach by region, do we get to a place where we don't have a standard level of protection, or we're not protecting against the same harms, across, all of a company's users? And like, is that okay?
and should it be okay for regions? You mentioned about like what approach a company or an organization would take in a region, but I think it's also okay for the region to tell a company what approach it needs to take there, right? Like, I think it's okay.
Oh no, absolutely.
Argentina to say, well, we don't think about exactly. We don't think about privacy exactly like the Europeans. We have these idiosyncrasies, and this is what applies here. And Brazil to do the same thing, right? Or,
I mean, but to be honest with you, before the GDPR, you had the same in Europe, right? Like every European country didn't, a EU country rather, didn't have the exact thing. They had, the Germans and, French were much more strict, and, other places were much more lax. So I think that like what we're seeing now is the GDPR, I think, triggered a lot of things. I think it triggered other countries who decided, I'm tired of Europe getting, or the EU getting, certain privacy rights. We want them too. And if legislation is what it takes, we'll draft a law. And I think that now, and I think countries used GDPR as a prototype because it did have such a strong response from organizations around the world. But I do think you're going to see a lot of personalization. I don't think countries or regulators outside of Europe feel beholden to GDPR. I just think it's a nice template for them to use.
Look at e-privacy, right? E-privacy has not been able to pass. And so there's still a whole bunch of variability going on around, I don't know, cookies, device used data. There's a different approach in every country with respect to, and I feel this pain a lot, with respect to like marketing a company in those regions. Like for each country, I need to do a separate analysis on how to market into that country, because so much of it is digital. and digital marketing is touched by privacy so much, and the privacy regulation is not there yet. So we have the existing cookie rules, which are again difficult to construe against the GDPR. So
let me ask a question. Let me ask this question because this is interesting to me. You brought up cookies, which, are the bane of my existence. But, so what do you think about consent? Because I feel like there's this huge shift all of a sudden that consent. Everybody needs to consent. And do we think that consent actually helps us achieve, the goals that we're after when it comes to privacy and protecting users?
Is it for
I've
me?
got a lot of,
I mean, it's for either.
Go for it, Andy.
And there's always this tension, Dennis, because the GDPR created this concept of, not taking data and forcing users into some sort of activity based on the fact that you've asked them to process their data. So it just breaks ad tech in a lot of ways, because the ad-supported internet requires the data in order to deliver on that promise. And so if you back that out, then you get the sort of the ethical argument about access to certain services and what are my rights with respect to access to the internet and certain services and free content versus paid platforms. And it just goes very spirally very quickly. And so I think what we all thought might happen has happened. And that's that even though there's a debate over consent, or there's challenge with how you sort of collect consent on websites and whether you are able to deliver ads based on that, the actual practice that we've seen has been to continue doing that, to have people accept cookies and deliver content, because lo and behold, it's what people want. And there's a huge, massive advertising machine, revenue creation engine powering major companies and publishers in Europe that like even a regulator can't disrupt it. And so I think we've just seen market power continue to dominate in that area, and the consent mechanism sort of slips away in some sense, in terms of I guess technically you're getting consent, but you're also still able to kind of condition that on the ability to deliver something someone wants.
But here's where I get tripped up, right? Like the obsession with consent troubles me, because like the European GDPR sort of definition, it's like, what is it? Informed and
unambiguous,
unambiguous. Right. Unambiguous and informed. Right. Yeah. So we look at like cookie banners. We look at what, banners on websites that are seeking consent for tracking, right? How many people do you actually think are unambiguously and informedly clicking OK on that? Like, just to be serious. Like, let's be serious.
Almost none. I
Zero.
do this for a living, and I can't.
I was gonna say, are you guys reading these suckers? So is it really important?
I can't. Like, I'm not working those days, so like
right,
I can't.
Right. So on a Friday night when I download the new app and I'm trying to do my thing, and I've got to go through, like, I don't read the TOS. I definitely don't read the privacy statement, and I also don't read this consent banner or whatever it is. Right? Doesn't matter how simple you make it. Like, the idea that I'm actually doing it is silly, because we know people aren't. And so, but that's one problem. The other problem is what you're doing is you're saying to the consumer, you've got homework. You've got to learn about this.
I was just going to say,
yeah, you've got the burden to inform yourself. You've got the burden to decide that you have made this decision voluntarily and without ambiguity. Like, that is extremely unreasonable to ask people when we know they have to answer these questions about consent and permission 1,000 times a day now, because it's being re-prompted over and over by different companies they do business with. I just don't know that it's a good model, because it puts a lot of pressure on people, and so they just ignore it, as I would, and I do. Right.
So, but here's the thing. I think the reason why people rely on consent is exactly what you said. It puts the onus on users to know what they're getting themselves into. But to me, that goes back to transparency, right? And the reason why consent is being pushed in a digital ads environment is because there was so little transparency for such a long time. And when you don't know, you make things up, right? Like, the problem feels like much more extreme, much more terrible, we're reading your diary, like all of these terrible things because we didn't know. And the more you don't know, the more you can fantasize about what's happening. And so I think this push to consent is really at the heart of it is about transparency. It's about if you make someone consent, you have to disclose all this stuff. So now, as a regulator, I know that this person has been provided with all the risks up front. It's kind of like on the cigarette package, right? Like if you smoke cigarettes, like all these bad health things can happen. But if you want to still buy the cigarette, like, you know, we can't stop you. It feels very much like that type of a situation. And I agree. I don't necessarily know that it is functioning as a warning label in the way that I think regulators had envisioned because people can't be bothered.
Is it counterbalanced, Dennis, by the rights that we were discussing before? Because in Pedro's example, I think about the face swap app. Remember that thing people were doing, and they were clicking through and they were doing it, and then they realized some things were happening with their data, and lots of people probably went in and deleted that app or asked for deletion, and maybe those rights didn't exist in the same ease of finding them and accessing them before. So I wonder maybe there is, at least you're giving consumers a lever.
So I do think, I agree. I totally agree that I completely agree that some of the new rights that have come with these different, pieces of privacy legislation definitely help to counterbalance that. But I also think that there's a certain level of like sophistication that is required, right? Like
and time.
Some users, and let's be fair, some of these controls and how to access your rights, like it's not easy. They exist now, and you have to tell people about them. But I have you tried to, like Netflix or something, or whatever company, have you tried to go in and see like how you can exercise some of these rights? Like it is not super easy.
We talked about this on the podcast, right, Andy? Like I can barely figure out how to exercise my rights, and it takes sometimes an hour with just one organization, right? If I really want to figure out, like, are you a processor, are you a controller, where's this stuff sitting? And I've got to go through all of these processes and send the emails or fill out forms. That's one company. Now imagine if I just decide I want to check all the ones on my phone. I have no idea how many apps are on my phone because Apple doesn't make that easy for me to know, but there's pages and pages of apps. So if I just wanted to know what my phone is doing, that would be a full-time job. I would have a job. Like it would be my job.
Yeah, but it doesn't stop at your phone, right? Because presumably some of those apps are not mobile device apps. Those are like desktop apps or not, apps that are connected to like other systems. So like it is quite complicated. So I think that I think the rights and the controls are definitely a step in the right direction, but I think transparency is something that's being missed in all this. Having all the WYSI tools and having all the, the different rights. Like if users don't really understand what's happening, and they don't have a good way of making that risk assessment, because I think people don't know, right? People don't know what the impact of these daily decisions of signing up and giving their email and giving this data all these different companies. They don't understand what that means for them 5-10 years down the line. They don't understand what that means for them tomorrow. They know that they want to get food delivered to them because we're in a pandemic and they can't be bothered to cook another meal, and so they're going to download DoorDash and like get a burger from the restaurant down the street that might be struggling. Like that's what they know. No one is thinking in that moment, oh my gosh, my credit card is going in there, and now they're going to know what kind of food I eat, and is this going to somehow find its way to my health insurance company? Like, these are the things that people aren't thinking about. And you, as Pedro, you mentioned, no one can be expected to be doing this kind of risk analysis in those moments.
I think that's right. And this is where I think other industries have gotten it much better. And this is not a perfect example, but I think it's a good one. Like if you look at the movie rating system in the United States, right?
MPAA.
Yeah. So if you look at that system, there's like 5 ratings or whatever it is, right? There's like G, PG, PG-13, R, and whatever the adult one is, I forget. So you've got like these 5 ratings. It doesn't put the pressure on a parent to watch the movie before the kid, to decide if the kid should watch the movie. It is sort of an intuitive way to say to a parent, like, these are the categories that we place movies in. When you go decide to watch a movie in one of these categories, you can expect generally some of the following, right? And so like, with G, it's going to be relatively safe. With PG, there might be some minor adult themes. With PG-13, there's going to be some violence and some sexual content. And then, with R, there's going to be a lot of violence, a lot of sexual content. It's going to be more explicit, and there's going to be language. Like, I know that, and I've never gone to read what these things mean. I just know that. I've never gone to MPAA's website to do anything. And so it's a good tool. And maybe we should think about privacy disclosure and transparency in similar ways.
Yeah,
Maybe
but that's like the new. So two things. I agree, but I think MPAA works because it is like generally accepted. It's ubiquitous. Like everyone understands it. I think what you're talking about, proposing, kind of sounds like nutrition labels, which I have a lot of thoughts about, and I don't know that we have time.
But the nutrition labels as they are right now are impossible. Like, those aren't helpful.
No, I agree, but I mean, that's kind of what you're talking about. So I have been an advocate in my sort of professional circles of a long time of sort of like curated privacy, sort of palettes, right? So like, if you could say, I have a high risk tolerance, then you could go in and like, there will be default settings for people who are high risk, or people who have who are like kind of like stock portfolios. You could just click a button and say like, I'm in this category, and so my settings will be by default configured for my risk tolerance with respect to all these different kinds of things. I think that's similar to what you're saying. I think the problem with the nutrition label and the MPAA thing is that it doesn't change it, right? It just calls out what the risk is, and the user doesn't have an opportunity to make informed decisions. Like, they can accept it or not accept it, but who's not going to use their banking app, right?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I would say, though, the problem with the current like nutrition label approach is that it's being dictated by a couple of players, right? Like the
MPAA, I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying.
But I guess what I'm suggesting is, if we could figure out as an industry, when I say industry, I mean platforms, social media platforms, like device platforms, ad tech ecosystem, and just come up with a framework that is understandable for human beings. Like, our transparency capacity would go way up. But like, I just don't think there's a will to cooperate in the way that there have been in other like content generating industries, and I'm not sure exactly why that is.
Remember,
I'm not saying nutrition label is the right answer or movie restriction caveats are the right answer, but like, cooperation probably is, and I just don't see enough of it.
I got the answer. Do you remember, well, I don't have the exact answer, but remember when we talked to Derek Zollner, and he told a story about a big TV executive and being approached by Google, and Google being like, this is back, years ago, showing him all the things they could do with respect to tracking and ROI and advertising. And he was like, stop, this is my cash cow. Like, you can't, the blindness of the box is my cash cow. So like, there's some of that going on here for sure.
I think you're probably right.
The opacity of the system and the depth at which tech moves faster and faster and faster, like, that's the secret sauce in some sense. I think
you're probably right. I think you're both probably right. And I hear Dennis on the limits of the capacity to create like some sort of unified way of Go
I know. So like the point I was trying to make about the MPAA thing and like the default settings is that like, it tells you the risk, right? But here's the thing about the MPAA ratings. I wrote a paper about this in Cookies like long time ago, and I actually don't remember what it said, but I do remember that I referenced the MPAA as like a framework. And I think the thing about that is that they edit movies, right? They edit movies based on a set of criteria so that it fits into the category. So like, in order for something like that to work, even nutrition labels, you can't just like tell people what you're doing and then say like, we think we're about an X, right? There needs to be a common framework for what makes you an X, and what that means for your back end, and what that means for your data practices. And like,
I think that's right. I think that's actually a really good point.
We have to jet here, but also I would say your engineers will kill you. Like, as a privacy lawyer, you're
100%. Like, I don't think we're gonna get that.
Yeah, I
think you go backwards, my engineering team would be like freaking out. So
last question. I've got one last question.
Go ahead, buddy. Go ahead.
If any of the Ninja Turtles could be a privacy lawyer, which one should it be and why?
Or what would be Michelangelo? He was the most responsible.
I feel like Donatello is like the prototype of the current privacy lawyer, but I would like to see more Michelangelo. I actually agree with Dennis.
Which turtle uses the nunchucks?
Oh, that's Michelangelo.
Okay, so to me, that weapon represents privacy the most. We're like, because it's just like it's like a pretzel, right? It's constantly like twisting itself around and flipping on its head, right? The other weapons to me feel sort of surgical.
What about Raphael? He had the size. Yeah, he had the size. Those
I feel like Raphael takes on the good persona of the regulator. He's kind of grumpy. He's really smart. He's a good fighter.
He's like super aggressive as well.
So he's a little aggressive.
Maybe the regulator has the stick though.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
They're just like trying to bash things.
The thing about Donatello with the bow or whatever it is, why do I know all these weird ninja things? Is because he's smart. Like he's the quirky, nerdy one of the group. But anyway, yeah, I think it's Michelangelo. We need more fun and privacy, and I think we need people to be a little bit more lighthearted about all of this. And we'd probably get a lot more done.
Good stuff.
Thanks, Dennis.
Great conversation.
Hey.
This was awesome.
All right.
Are we done? Did you finish?
I think we'll record.
Oh man, Dennis, that was great, man. That was a pretty seamless episode. Low editing energy on that one for sure.
Yeah, well, compared to the last one, this one was an A+.
Oh my God, we did one. I can't tell you with who, Dennis. Like we did the last one, and at the end of it, Andy and I were both like, "That's never seen the light of day."
Oh,
like, there's no way. That one's going in the crates, man. It was bad. It was bad.
Oh no, that's okay. Well, that was fun. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, man. Thanks for joining us. And when you move back across the pond, if you do, we'll do a European version of part 2. I think it'll be super fun.
I think so too. Sounds great.
Thanks.
All right, man. Take care. Later.
Bye.